it's a little bit past 1:30, so we'll go ahead and start this August 9th, 2019 special meeting of the Carson City Library Board of Trustees. And we can proceed with the roll call.
Chairperson Hayes.
Present.
Vice Chairperson Long.
Here.
Trustee Balderson. Here. Trustee Cranston.
Here.
Trustee Patton.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll move on to item 2, public comment. If any members of the public wish to address the Library Board of Trustees, now would be the time. Seeing none forthcoming, we'll move on to item 3, discussion and possible action regarding the selection of a new library director. So, we're going to run this meeting very similar to the first one. We will call the candidates in. We will go through our panel of questions. And it looks like our first candidate is here. Oh, okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Hayes.
All right. If I could just get you to state your name for the record real quick.
Thank you. My name is Todd Colgrove.
Thank you very much. So what we're going to do,
Press it, it'll turn green, and then after that.
yeah, just let go.
Thank you.
And then
So much for hacking the microphone.
and then we can probably just leave your mic on the whole time.
Very good. If I can repeat for the record, my name is Todd Colgrove.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So what we're going to do, Mr. Colgrove, is we have a total of 10 questions. We're going to start on my right, your left, with Ms. Balderson, and we're going to move across, and then we'll move across a second time.
Thank you.
And whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our first question for you, Mr. Colgrove, is tell us about your experience as it relates to this position and why you are interested in Carson City's library director position.
Thank you, Ms. Balderson. If I can take just 1 second before I respond to that and say thank you to each of the trustees and the members that have invited me here today. The core reason why I'm interested in this position is because Carson City Library is a key partner in the future of libraries around the state. It's a critical path, in fact, and it would be a terrible thing if you didn't have all the support that you need to pull this together. The question why I'm interested in this position is an awfully long answer. It's probably several minutes. If you don't mind, I'll wander in. My background, my family goes back to this neck of the woods to before Nevada was a state, right? So they came over, the bulk of the genetics came over in the potato famine during the 18th century, paused in Missouri, overshot Carson City by about 40, 50 miles into the Topaz Lake, Antelope Valley area, and then grew out through Smith Valley, Mason Valley, which is where I grew up. So you can see I haven't made it very far from where that started. But I care really deeply about this area, and I care really deeply about libraries because the library is what provided the lifeline to me when I was young, growing up out in a very rural and beautiful part of the country. It saved my intellectual life, and it gave me an option of things to do when I grew up other than work in a mine or in agriculture. And so I've had highly rewarding careers, multiples at this point throughout my life, only because then there was a thing called the bookmobile that came lumbering out from Washoe County once a week that did that magical thing that libraries do, which is sort of smell out what it is that you're interested in and feed you more of it because we know the right things happen. And after I started after I went through and earned my bachelor's, master's, and PhD in physics, and was doing work, my major professor was with the Hubble Space Telescope Sciences Institute and the Goddard Space Flight Center, and doing lots of exciting, fun things. I launched the first internet service provider in the state of Nevada, grew up throughout the state, all the way from the eastern slopes of the Sierras to Elko to Las Vegas. And then over the course of 15 years, there were 6 different companies that I launched, grew, succeeded with, and eventually sold. When I was selling off the last of my holdings, I crossed paths with an old friend from the university. And after a 45-minute conversation that probably sounded a lot like the one we're having right now, I just remember him saying the words, "It's time to use your powers for good instead of evil." And I swallowed hook, line, and sinker. And for me, that meant the library. And so I started aggressively looking for ways to jump in and be of service to the library. At the time, I was teaching at the university, and I started working with the university libraries there, and we transformed a lot of them. We did a lot of work, and it was exciting. And then the rebellion spread, and the De La Mare Library became the first academic library in the United States to offer 3D printing and scanning services, but even further to open up their doors and say, well, because they had this library director that was convinced that even though the university is a walled garden, the state tax dollars are what are paying the bills, and so that means the doors are open to everyone. And so the explosion of innovation and entrepreneurship that came out of that just made me an even truer believer in the power of libraries. And one thing led to another, and I was working, then Governor Sandoval named me to the State Council on Libraries and Literacy, where I got to work even more directly and aggressively with public libraries around the state. And I mean, it just would make my day to hear how we were able to, with a few nickels and dimes, fix the old horse trailer that was converted into a bookmobile out in Lincoln County, because now they could spray a bed liner on it and fix up all the leaking spots, and it could be a bookmobile for another 10 or 15 years. And it was clear to me that's using my powers for good instead of evil. Swimming upstream, then I got thrown under the bus with the state library, and I mean that in the best way. My predecessor was abruptly retired after he had a stroke and ran off the road. And a colleague that I had worked with previously when she was working with Carson City Library was twisting my arm and saying, you really should throw your hat in the ring because we need that help, and this is how the state library can benefit. And frankly, the legislature was coming into session, and she didn't feel like she could handle it. And so I explained to her patiently that I'm in a tenured position at the university. I get paid for not doing anything. I have the best job in the world, I thought. Why would I want to do that? She explained how I could have more impact with the libraries. And again, I swallowed hook, line, and sinker, and we made it through the biennium. And for the first time in over 12 years, that state legislature has dramatically increased the funding that's available for public libraries around the state. It's thrilling. And to be clear, we were able to do that because of the support of the Nevada Library Association, but even more importantly, because of the support of Diane Baker and this team that regularly showed up. Pardon me as I go sideways, and even though this is on the public record, I'm headed down to Las Vegas, where on Monday and Tuesday, I'm going to be talking with them at length and asking why in the heck, whenever we would go down to Las Vegas to see who's there supporting this library legislation, the room would be empty except for maybe one. So, sorry, guilt and shame is coming into play, but we have to pull this forward, right? We're making progress. This is dramatic. At this point, where I'm at in the state library is we've made it through that biennium. I already long ago gave up my tenured position at the university. Now it's time to show up, right? Put up or shut up. And that's exactly where I'm at. So I have every confidence that with the new director of the Department of Administration and the staff that are in the State Library, and with your support in this library, working with the State Library, that it's not going to fall on its face, that we will be able to get the legislation in place for the next biennium. Long answer to a short question. Did I mention I was a university professor? It's a mistake to ask us to talk for any length of time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. So what is your vision of the public library's purpose and role in society?
Thank you, Trustee Long. Again, I'm going to just climb up on the soapbox because apparently that's what I do. But the vision for the public library in society goes back for literally thousands of years. And I'm going to talk at some length and with some authority about this because I'm just finalizing the last chapters of a book that talks specifically about the role of the library and technology in society. And it's specifically, the earliest recordings that we have of this go back to the Great Library at Alexandria, right? Which is arguably when librarianship reached its peak. And when you go back to the Great Library at Alexandria, there were written documents there. There were lots and lots of scrolls there because, well, frankly, because Pharaoh Ptolemy put the full weight of his government behind it. He recognized that information is critical, and if you've got more information, you're more powerful and you can do the right things. And so he said, if you're going to dock in the harbor at Alexandria, be prepared to surrender any written documents that you might have, that were immediately whisked off to a waiting army of scribes, literally hundreds of scribes, that would duplicate them and give you back the duplicate. And the original was placed in the library. Well, more exactly, the original was placed in the Museon, right, which is the root of our today museum. So the library, even back then, was not about the books or the information artifacts. It was about this place where scholars and members of the community could come together and talk and brainstorm and come up with new ideas. The sorts of things that you're doing and supporting in the Carson City Library on a daily basis are the sorts of things that were funded, which is why the Great Library was funded and supported for nearly, over 400 years. And it worked. It worked, right? Ptolemy took a flyer with this experiment, and it paid off. The economy of the community of Alexandria eclipsed, in short order, it absolutely eclipsed the economy of Athens, the economy of Rome, despite being repeatedly burnt down, because this community was there coming up with all of these great new ideas. A lot of them you've heard of, right? Like the steam engine, like the fact that the earth is round, even geometry was invented there. It's what happened when you get bright people together, give them access to the kind of information resources, whether they're a book or a laser cutter or what have you. Magic happens, and that, in a nutshell, is why we put tax dollars toward it. We're not interested in building, in the middle of the 1950s, the quote was, the library should not be an altar for the worship of books. That's not what it is. And we kind of lost our way for about 150 years in the practice of librarianship. It's not to suggest that books are not a critical part of what we do, but it's a mistake to think that that's all we do. Because if we do that, then when the format of the book changes from print to electronic, just like it changed from the clay tablet to the papyrus scroll to the codex in the 15th century, or the print book that we have now, to whatever it'll be next. If we say that our brand is the book, then when the book disappears, we no longer have a reason for being. And legislators think, why should we give money for something like that? Mm-hmm. Our story, and the story of the public library in particular, is about creating that common place, that great good place where everyone is included and can come, and we work it. So again, I'm climbing into the pulpit. Hopefully that speaks to the question, Trustee.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much.
If I could bounce back for 1 second, I would say the fact that the Carson City Library has been doing this so long, for at least 10 years, that's fundamentally part of the appeal of what the interest of this position holds. My apologies for stepping on your time, Chair.
Oh, no, thank you very much. So my question is, how do you get results, build team spirit, and not burn people out all at the same time?
Exactly the right question. And that's where it requires this dance. And again, I think we're ahead of the game in libraries, because just like that bookmobile driver or the librarian that's on the circ desk, or leading the children's reading hour, the magic is in identifying what that spark is inside of the child and fanning it, feeding more of it, because that spark, that flame, is what is going to drive that person's bus. Now, the dirty little secret that I know, that each of us in the practice of librarianship know, is that we had lots of other options to be gainfully employed. Nobody signs on to work at a library to get rich, right? Lots of other places where we could work, but we chose the library because there's something fundamentally there that we want to do, that we feel we can give back. We can use our powers for good instead of evil in that sense. And the real trick, the art form, I would suggest, of an effective manager or leader that is able to get things done without burning people out, is all about identifying what that spark is in each of the team members, fanning it, and most importantly, doing what we can do, the director with the help of the board, to make sure that that is aligned with the needs of the library. Because when that's aligned, a magic happens. The reality of it is, if you go, I shouldn't say anything ill of this state, but I suppose it's any sort of a bureaucratic environment. Across the board, the average employee is only about 30% engaged, which means that we've got 70% capacity that's lying fallow most of the time. If we can just accomplish that alignment, we can more than double the output of each individual and still have lots of spare cycles for time around the coffee cooler. The problem, and you allude to it in the end of your question, is that once you get that alignment and you start having success, no one wants to be just 70% of the way there. We all get excited, and we all do put in 110, 120%. That's where the problem that I like to have, much rather than trying to convince people to work, is to be coming back and saying, yeah, but are you a classified worker? Sorry, I don't know, but if you're a classified worker, you're only allowed to work 40 hours a week, and we don't have the overtime. How can we finagle this so that you're not burning out? How can we pull that back a little bit? How can we flex your time? What are the things that we can do to make sure that that happens? And one of the things I've been told repeatedly by folks that have made the mistake of signing on to work with me is that I'm not shy about going back and offering praise for all of the successes that happen, which really, at the end of the day, is what most of us are working for, right? We're not really working for that paycheck that gets direct deposited that we never actually hold in our hands and it just sort of magically evaporates again. But if I can get that was an amazing job, or you really knocked it out of the park, or gee, are you sure that's the way you wanted to go? How would we do that better? Then I know that you're on my team and I want to work with you. And I think that's part of the key. Part of the magic is a strong word, but the reality of effective leadership is that it's not about, I saw a graphic one time and it was basically, it had someone that was the boss standing on top of the desk, cracking a whip, with the workers pulling the rope and wondering why the desk isn't moving very fast. When really, if we need to move a desk, we all jump on and pull it and that desk moves, right? So to the extent that that is one of the problems, is that folks working with me, that is the leadership style that I expect to see amongst all of us, because every single person working in the organization, at the end of the day, is a leader. And that's about one of the only times that you'll get really harsh criticism from me, is if you're trying to climb up on the desk and say, pull. It just doesn't work. If that, hopefully that answers your question, Chair.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much for your time, for your answer.
Mr. Colgrove, my question is, I would like for you to tell us about a time when you developed a viable strategy, but you encountered a roadblock, and how did you adjust your plans?
When I had come up with a viable strategy and encountered a roadblock, and how did I adjust? Yes. Just about every single thing that I've done over the course of my career in libraries has been under those constraints, because, again, when universities are fundamentally bureaucratic, sort of roadblock-driven machines, every library I've worked with is operating in a similar sort of a space. It requires that creativity. So I guess for me, in hindsight, what would we do? Well, first off, when I start in, it's a failing in my own character, is that I'm quite certain that I don't know what the answer is on day one. I know that I don't know. And so if I were selected for this position, you would see me spending a lot of time trying to get up to speed. And it would likely take a good 6 months to get to the point where I'm beginning to wrap my arms around what is, and working with the stakeholders to figure out what our plans are. I'm veering off the question. Thank you for correcting me, Felicity. An example would be the very first thing in the De La Mare Library, when I was named the head of that library. And if any of you have been on the UNR campus, the De La Mare Library is in a historic part of the campus. It's in the second oldest building that still stands on the campus. It's the Mackey Mines building. And it's a beautiful building, and the library inside of it had come to be known as the Beautiful Library. And then it had morphed into the Quiet Library, because no one wanted to be in a beautiful library. They didn't have much use for it. And so when I was named into the position, it was with the charge that this library needs to become a vibrant knowledge center on the south part of campus. No roadmap, no plan in terms of how you're going to get there. So we got there, and first step is to come up with a plan and to pull the staff together and say, folks, this was actually right at the bottom of the Great Recession, right? So we've got to transform this beautiful library without irritating people that would grab their pitchforks and go to the barricades against any change we might make. And it needs to become a vibrant space. How do we do this? Start with the plans. We march forward with the plans. Immediate roadblock, there's no funds. There's no dollars. We can't do it. Okay. Well, we still have to transform it, because if we don't, this library, in my opinion, if we don't, that library is probably going to be closed, because it's quiet, it's in the heart of campus. It's just a matter of time before some high-ranking bureaucrat wanders through and says, this would be great office space for my department. We don't need these books, put them up in the big old library, away we go. So again, my approach to it was to pull the team together and have exactly that frank conversation. What do you think? None of us wants to go work up in the knowledge center. We want to preserve the value that we've got here. How are we going to do that? We started brainstorming ideas, and the first thing you know, someone kicked out the idea, what about surplus? Yeah, surplus. We can do that because we had already started identifying, and the collections in that library had not been weeded for many, many years. So we were weeding them, and we were addressing issues that came up from our customers, like, I can't browse the shelves because I get interrupted with row after row of shelves that have stuff that I'm not interested in. Well, that stuff was 150 years old and most appropriately belonged in our special collections library. So we had started the process of shifting that. And as we were shifting literally 26 miles of bookshelves and taking down shelves one at a time, because that's what you do when you have no funds, we were opening up space in the library, and nature abhors a vacuum. We couldn't afford to have big empty spaces, so we started looking at surplus options on campus. Quickly found that there was nothing useful there. But then, when the library had been built, there was another spot that they had moved out of Getchell before they demolished it, and there was a lot of old furniture there that we were able to scrounge. And then the mother lode was when we were able to get the doors open with the Washoe County School District. And we found tables that were probably more appropriate for a third grade level or kindergarten, these giant kidney-shaped tables, and we brought those back and we started putting them in place, creating ad hoc collaboration areas for students. We were able to afford cans of paint, so we bought some whiteboard paint and we started painting whiteboards on the wall, even though that was against the rules. It took about a month to get past that rule, because what it took was working with buildings and grounds and visiting the new buildings and pointing out that that's exactly what they were applying in the new medical building up at one end of the campus. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. Hey, you guys want to paint that, or do you want us to paint it on the weekend? And so we started building that out, and the people started coming back and using the space. More problems that we have, we didn't have enough real estate. So how are you going to? I was hearing from folks, we don't have any place where we can get together and collaborate and work on our stuff except for the open floor. Well, we don't have any funds to build anything. We don't have any place to put them. But by going back to the team and saying, hey, team, roadblock, what I'm hearing is we don't have any private collaboration rooms. And what I'm hearing from you is we have no idea what's going on in the library because our offices are back of house here and we're behind a wall of books and we don't know what's going on. Within 20 minutes, the staff had come back and said, yeah, but what if we just traded places? What if we used some of this dumpster dove cubicle furniture to build office space for us out on the floor where we can hear what's going on, and then repurpose our office space for collaboration rooms, which we did. And that sent shockwaves out to the community because we were willing to give up private office space, and one thing leads to another. The library was revitalized. So, I mean, that's an example. I remember a former, the vice chancellor actually of IT explained to me once when I was carping to him about a user experience issue. He said, if they're not smart enough to figure out how to do it, maybe they don't belong here. And I thought that was kind of coarse, but it's something that I've used as a personal challenge ever since. That I don't think bureaucracy and structure is there to keep the right things from happening. It's there to encourage us to be as creative as we can to work around it and make the highest and best use of what limited funds we have. So, again, a long answer, Trustee Patton. My apologies.
Oh, thank you very much. And I have been to the DeMille Library, and I appreciate all that you did there.
It's a distinct honor.
Could you lead us through your decision-making process on a difficult problem that you've worked on in the past?
Wow, there's so many difficult problems. Thank you, Trustee Cranston. If I could ask Claudia, are you looking perhaps more for working with people or working with systems in a problem?
Probably both, honestly. Yeah, the decision process that you go through is the key here.
Okay. And just to make sure that I stay on track, if you wouldn't mind, you're looking for a difficult problem that I've worked on in the past, the process of how I worked through it. I would say, so far, I don't know that I've met anyone here in the US that has wrestled with a real difficult problem in the first world. We deal with a lot of problems that we find really troubling. But I occasionally am reminded by my colleagues that are doing work around the world that all of my problems that I'm carping about are first world problems, and that helps, you know. And I say that one colleague that I've worked with, actually, that's a tiny little problem. It was sort of fun. He was doing disaster relief in Nepal when they had the big earthquake in 2015. And he was trying to figure out trying to kickstart new jobs and things that people there could do with what they have. And the problem is, well, what do you have? They had mud, and they had trash, they had plastic bottles. And so between the two of us, we sort of brainstormed and kickstarted the idea a little bit. And the first thing you know, the idea was born. They've built several industries. One of them is computer programming, because they can do that from low-rent laptops that are powered in the village, and that's one version. Another version has to do with 3D printing. And working with them, we were able to help them kickstart, and with the university there actually, to get a filament machine built, right? So that they could take the trash, the plastic bottles, and turn it into 3D printer filament that they could then turn around and use in their 3D printer to 3D print things that might be designed, right? And what they're doing literally right now is, I don't remember the brand name of the thing, but they've designed and literally building bicycle lights out of this used trash and rubber that they use for the straps, right, from tires that they cut into straps that hold the lamps on. And they're recycling the whole thing and selling those lamps on Amazon because they can, and because they're entangled with these people that want to do entrepreneurial things. And so that's one, I mean, that's a teeny little problem, but it's exciting. And one of the problems that they faced was, for the next step, critical path piece in this, they needed to prove the concept with these filament pellets that could only be bought here in the US. They had something coming up in 3 weeks. And also, by the way, they needed a 1-inch size drill bit. None of these, it's not like you can go down to Ace Hardware in Nepal and buy it. But they knew that I was interested in helping with it. And so they put out their call and said, anyone know that can help this? And it's like, I turned to my wife and said, it's Thanksgiving here in a couple of days. How do you feel about a quick trip over there? And so we booked the flight, and thankfully we were able to find reasonable plane tickets and went through Shanghai with contraband in the suitcase. I don't know if it's technically contraband, but it was for a good purpose, and it got them kickstarted. So that's a small problem. I mean, the larger problems are, what do we do? How do we get, it is a problem that keeps me awake most nights, and I'm always spinning on, how do we get more monies into the hopper to get out to the libraries around the state? Because the libraries around the state, if I can be politically incorrect, I would say that librarians have a lot in common with the native Eskimos. I mean, they do so much with nothing. And so with a little bit more, they can do so much more. And it's really quite exciting. The problem is, we're all very strongly libertarian here in Nevada, right? It's like, We all value this sort of radical independence, and we all need to be independent, but we also need to prove the concept and get it going. So one of the problems that I'm working on and have been working on as a state librarian is working with colleagues around the country. And we've got, the first part of the problem is coming up what a possible solution might look like. And the second part of it is then acting on it. The first part of it, I'm quite expert when it comes to that part. It's called design thinking, right? Where you start with the idea, you start with developing and building a deep level of empathy for the problem, and then you frame the problem that you're trying to work with, and then you work with the community to brainstorm the idea and possible solutions, and then you prototype the solutions and roll it out to the public, and those last steps are ones that you're constantly iterating. So you're going from prototype to refining them back. And where we're at right now with that solution in a broader context is, well, I'd rather spend the federal dollars than I would state dollars, because I kind of have a personal stake in the state dollars, and those are my tax dollars. So we've been focusing as state librarians on the federal pockets, and the dollars that come in from the LSTA grant funds. Forever here in Nevada, it's been a little bit over $1 million, which goes a long way. But working with colleagues over the last year and a half now, we've actually came up with the idea, which is, how can we explain this to a congressperson so that they'll get it and hang their hat on it? And the idea was a simple one. We're not asking for a lot. We're just asking for $1 per capita. $1, just $1 for every man, woman, and child in the state. That's cheap. Can you do that? And they didn't ask really how much they were paying. It was more like about 50 cents. And they bit and they swallowed, and it's passed. It's actually part of the legislation now. Now, to be clear, it's not funded, but we're halfway there. So that, part of it is getting that figured out. How do we get that carried across the finish line, then get it funded, then the dollars come in, then how do we sort it out? How do we get it out to each of the states in just the right way so that it's going to have the most impact? And that's where you all come in. You're the critical path piece of that equation, working with your library director and your counterparts around the state. Then we come up with the right things, and we do amazing things with very little. Again, thanks to your support. I should have led with that. My apologies for being so insensitive, but honestly, the core thing that I do, if you all were not here, if the trustees that ride herd over the libraries around this state did not exist, I can't imagine how any of this work could ever be accomplished. It simply couldn't. So thank you for your service. There is no doubt but that you show up and vote with your time and your treasure to make the right things happen. Again, I don't know, Trustee Cranston, if that speaks a little bit to the question. Good heavens. And then
We're back to me.
thank you.
And the question is, describe your informing strategy with customers, bosses, peers, and direct reports.
Hopefully, thank you, I apologize. Are you Trustee Balderson?
Yes.
I did not get the
I'm new.
message. Welcome. Well done. Well
you.
done, Mike. Trustee Balderson. And I think with any luck, my answer to this question can be a little briefer, because I think I've been beating around the bushes of that in all of my answers. It really boils down to knowing that I don't know. My grandfather, or actually no, it was a good friend, would often remind me that the good Lord gave me 2 of these and 1 of these for a reason. And I do my very best to try to spend more time listening than I do talking. And people, whether they're customers or staff or teammates or people are, I find, remarkably honest. They are always or never shy or very seldom shy about telling you what they actually believe. They might not tell you directly in so many words, but they will tell you with their actions, and they will tell you with their facial expressions and so on. So I spend a good deal of time listening and asking questions to try to inform that and carry that back the other way. A critical path piece of the answer to that question that I haven't spoken to is the part that you referred to, which is in the managing up, right? Which is, how do I make sure that each of you is informed with the things that you want to know without being overloaded with all the stuff that you don't want to know? And when do you want to know it? And what do you really not care about? And how do we dance, basically? It's the example that came to mind in Reno. They have an event called Hot August Nights, and there was every Sunday night this past month, there was the Reno Tango Club was offering free tango lessons, which seems like a very sketchy and terrifying thing to do. And trust me, it was. I'm many things, but not a good dancer. But it really struck me that the tango itself was such a good metaphor for how leadership and management operates. Because with the tango, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There is one person who is leading and the other person who is listening and following. And if you get those wrong, you're going to step all over each other's feet, because literally, as the person is leading is going forward, you sway together and you've got everything lined up so that as this person is stepping forward, that person is stepping back, and your foot goes right in the place where they left, and vice versa. So as long as you're clear about who's doing what, and you listen with your whole being, then there's never much of a mystery about it. I think that we're quite clear. Thank you. And I will do my best to listen.
Thank you. So have you ever had to be a champion for people that are not like you?
Trustee Long, if you could clarify what not like me might mean.
Well, have you had to go to bat for people who are not in the same, I guess, class, social class, ethnicity?
Different first language.
Yeah.
I would say yes, and I'm honored and quite proud of that. And I would need clear direction from this board if changes in my behavior needed to be addressed. An example of that, maybe 1 week, 2 weeks ago, you'll have to pardon me, time sort of flows like mud in my brain, but the Washoe County Library System held an event at their Sparks Library branch, which was, I think it's called Drag Queen Story Time. And that was an event that the Washoe County Library Director had brought forward from the branch library, because the branch library listened to its community and brainstormed with them about what type of events they wanted to hold in their library going forward. And the Drag Time Story Hour was one that came forward. They wanted to do that. The county library director said, "You're the library, I support that." They printed the brochures. They were out for at least 6 or 9 months before a pretty far-right group got wind of it and decided that they wanted to cast it as, well, no, it's really some sort of pervert action where they're trying to corrupt small children and teach them to be transvestites. But the bottom line of the call is that between 2 and 5% of the human community, when they are born, identify as they're growing up as transgender or non-gender binary, right? That's who they are. It's like saying, okay, don't be a chicken, instead I want you to be something else. Not the job of the library, But it is the job of the library to make sure that in that library's mind, that everyone is welcome in the library. And that includes the 2% of the community that might identify as transgender or non-gender specific. And so the library supported that. And when I got wind of it, I thought, that's exactly right. How can I be of support? Well, you work for the governor, and that means you don't have an opinion. It does mean that you better bring the governor into the loop and see if he wants to have an opinion. And I'm many things, but not opinionated, again, not one of them. So I did run it up through channels to see if Governor Sisolak wanted to say, don't do this. And then I was quite proud to be able to go show up and represent and say, the governor isn't here, but the state library is, and I'm representing that, and go team. And I was there with, oh my goodness, right out of the gate, I met a grandmother who was first generation American, and she was with a grandchild and a grandnephew, one of whom was born male but identified as female. And she was waving a flag literally in the face of anyone that would talk to her and saying, this is not about sex education. This is about story time. I want my kids to be engaged with reading because if they love reading, the right things will happen in their life. They will grow up and become successes. And I said, you go, girl. I got your back. And was there with all of the other members of the library community saying exactly that. It's a story time. We'll stand here in between you and the folks that are angry and want that to not happen. That's not the first time that I've done something associated with that, although it wasn't intentional the first time. It was when I was faced with the problem that the library itself was getting so popular that I was regularly running into people standing in line waiting to use the restroom. And I hate to say it, they were mostly females waiting to use the restroom because there was never a line at the male's bathroom. And so I did the sacrilegious thing of just opening the door and looking at it and saying, looks like it's the same equipment in both bathrooms. You know, what do you say we call this a gender-neutral restroom? And then whoever needs to use the restroom can use it. And I was stunned to find an entire community of people on campus that came out to thank me because up until then, apparently the odds, if you're transgender or non-gender specific, it's something like 50 to 70% chance. You and I can go to the bathroom all day long, we don't have any problem. They have some of these almost a 70% chance of being sexually assaulted just for trying to use the restroom. And if I can change that by just changing the sign on the door to gender neutral, that's a no-brainer. It might cause grief, but it's something that I would do in concert with leadership, which is how all good things are done, right? Hopefully that's speaking to the question, Trustee Balderson, standing up for people that aren't represented. Again, that's part of our DNA. One of the things that you have already found is that librarians seem all soft and squishy when it comes to most things, but they have backbones of absolutely pure steel when it comes to some things. And one of them would be the library is for everyone to use. So.
So would you please tell us about a time when you felt pulled in opposite or different directions on a values or an ethics issue?
Yes, thank you, Trustee Hayes. Right now is an example of one of those things. And Carson City Library is already ahead of this curve. You've already canceled the subscription to lynda.com. Hats off. Sorry to bring that up. Well, it's something that has recently come up, which is lynda.com was purchased by LinkedIn, and all of a sudden, what a great platform. We can leverage this to get even more people enrolled in our social media platform, more personally identifiable information that we can farm and sell more marketing stuff. And it's like, when I flip over the back of my ALA librarian card, one of the first things it says there is that I value and respect our patrons, our customers, our members' privacy more than anything else. So this company is saying, if you want to subscribe to us, you have to sort of twist the arms of everyone that's using the library into giving up their personal information. And that's a bridge too far. It's something that I'm currently literally arm in arm with the State Librarian of California and at least a dozen others from across the nation, basically talking with LinkedIn and saying, no. In fact, Greg Lucas in California just issued a big release saying he recommends that their libraries around the state do not use this. Their older version would work without having to give up personally identifiable information. Their new version will not. So he's actively recommending that they don't sign up for that. So pulled in two directions. Lynda.com is a toughie because, as you know, it's a really useful tool. It's something that can tell you just that one particular fiddly bit, so you don't have to wade through 2 hours of YouTube videos to find the thing you're looking for. Within a couple minutes, you're there. But on the other hand, personally identifiable information, you're pulled in both directions, and that is the job. That is what we are called to do, is to figure out how do we thread this needle. And that's typical. It's another example. It was, I was proud to be part of the conversation when this first came up, actually, when the Patriot Act went into place, right? When you check things out of the library, your catalog record is there, and up until that point, our catalog records were pretty complete. We knew everything that you'd ever checked out, and that was kind of good. And that would be helpful to a librarian that might want to suggest new stuff you might want to look at. But then the Patriot Act was passed, and part of the Patriot Act said that our records of our customers' personally identifiable information could be seized, at any time, that we could be just forced without even a court order to give over that personal information. And yet you're again pulled in both directions. You want to have this complete record, this information that you can share. On the other hand, I don't want to give up your personally identifiable information. How do we thread that needle? In our case, the conversation was straightforward. Well, we're not going to break the law. And so if you come to us and ask for the records under the Patriot Act, we will give them to you. But we are changing our policy and how our catalog operates so that at most you're going to get the last thing that person has checked out right now, because once it comes back in and gets checked back into the library so we know it's accounted for, that night it gets expunged from the record. And that's just part of the dance that we have to dance to make sure that our professional ethics align with the law of the land, with just what the right thing to do is. Again, I hope, don't hesitate to say, if I've shot wide of the question, trustees, I will always do my best to pull back in.
No, that completely answered the question for me.
Okay, very good.
Okay. Can you compare or contrast examples of times you've been effective and ineffective in political situations?
Wow, it'll be tough to compare and contrast because for me, in general, I'm always ineffective at the first try. And then the iteration keeps going, right? That stick-to-itiveness. And I think that's part of what I'm learning that the universe seems to hold in store, at least for me, which is that there are times when things are simply not going to work that way at all. And generally, when I've spent a lot of time coming up with it in the front of my brain, thinking about this big elaborate plan of how everything is going to work, and then the universe is pretty clear and says, yeah, no, it's not going that way. And then you have to pull back and say, what was it that I was trying to get to? And is the universe saying that isn't going to happen, or just my Rube Goldberg mechanism of getting there isn't going to work? And so you have to refit and refit. For me, it works well with a board of directors, basically, because I don't know what I don't know, and I don't have enough brain cells to come up with all of the ideas that are needed. So comparing and contrasting an idea of something that we wanted to do. Well, the first really, well, not the first, but an idea that came out of left field for me as director for staff was this idea of, wow, there's this newfangled thing called the 3D printer. We should really get one of those, and then everyone can print everything. And I'm like, yeah, okay, and that's nice. Let's find out more about it. And for me, again, it is always this cycle, which is there's this great idea, and I realize I don't want to shut the idea down in that person, because innovation and enthusiasm, and that spark that I was talking about earlier, is really hard to grow, but super easy to kill. So I don't mean to suggest for a minute that I was saying externally, yeah, I'll look at that. It was oh, wow, that's interesting. That's kind. Where would that work? What would it look like? And who would I talk with to see if that could be useful? And let's go out and talk with them, and then come back and say, our first idea of just marching out and trying to do that is not going to work. Why? Because I've done that a lot. So let's iterate through this on paper. Let's pretend that we're going to try to do this. What printer would we get? What would it try to do? Would it print in color? Would it print in plastic or ceramic or rubber? What's this thing look like? And let's start pretending that we've got a 3D printer and people are coming in. What are they trying to print? What are they trying to do? And then with this prototype, even though it's a model, it's just an idea that we've talked about and sketched up on a sheet of paper. Let's go back to industry and look at it and see what's available. What could we buy? Because what I would have bought before, when I was younger and more enthusiastic and able to waste more money, wouldn't have worked, right? Because this printer that was like a $700, gee whiz bang, everyone wants to have one of these, was really just a prototype itself. It was a brand new company that had only been around for a month or so. And so what we ended up with is identifying two different printers. One that we thought was the coolest, low-hanging, cheapest fruit, the most stable, most likely to succeed candidate. And then the other, and that was around $5,000. And the other one was the one that, well, when you dug into it, it turns out that 3D printers weren't brand new. They were over 30 years old. And the reason why they were all new and hot right now is because the patents had just expired. Let's go back and look at where they were being used and have been used in industry for over 30 years, because those are the printers that are tried and true, that have gone through many iterations. And because of all the economic pressure over here, the price on these had come down from $500,000 to $250,000 to $100,000 to $30,000 to $18,000. So we bought the one that was the flyer and the one that we knew was going to have to be like the diesel tractor, because we knew that that would keep going. And we bought this one to see if that could work. Within about 6 months, we got rid of this one though, because we learned as staff that was just requiring way too much care and feeding. It was too much pain to keep this one going. Whereas this one, to my knowledge, is still printing 10,000 pieces a year. But I mean, that's part of the example, right? You have to fail many, many times. I mean, if you're not failing, you're not making progress. But the trick is in figuring out how to fail without seriously compromising the organization. And that's the tango that we all dance, right?
Mr. Colgrove, could you, so I think that what we were looking for with that question is more effectiveness and ineffectiveness in political situations.
Oh, Petal, you're absolutely right. You clearly said political situation. Well, if I wanted to introduce a political aspect to that, that was highly political because nobody wanted to buy a 3D printer across the entire library's organization except for the people that were on the front lines trying to do it. And so in order to get that going forward, what we had to do as a team is to convene stakeholders across the organization and get their buy-in. To say, okay, this is our idea, and I glossed completely over that. So after we had sketched through these options and we had these two, then we wrote it up as a proposal and brought it back to the entire organization and said, okay, we're holding a meeting, I'm bringing the donuts, let's sit down and poke holes in this, Would this work? How would it fail? Do you want to go forward? Does this meet the need? This is something that we want to do, but what would you need to see in order to buy in with that? We took that further because that was the first foray down a long road with makerspace stuff. But in order to keep that going, you have to go back and you have to invite those stakeholders. They have to be part of the party. I think that's part of the problem that we too often run into in this country. Is this sense where entire groups end up feeling left out. It's like there's a party going on somewhere. There seems to be a general read across the country that there's a party going on the left and the right coasts, and everyone in the middle is left out of it. And so there's this passive-aggressive pushing back and forth that's just a bloodletting on the political scale because we're not inviting one another to the party. I wouldn't be a librarian if I didn't recommend a good book, but a book that I'm reading that's speaking very clearly to that right now is called, it's Love Your Neighbor with a long subtitle. It's basically how good people can help save America from a culture of basically, I'm forgetting the last word of it. It's a dehumanizing culture. It's this sense that instead of saying, I hear you, I don't agree with you, but I recognize you as a human being, we're instead saying, oh, you're one of them. And so I'm just going to completely dehumanize you, and we're not even going to have a conversation anymore, and we get further apart. That was something that this project was very much at risk of, especially as it was coming from a branch library. The folks in the mothership didn't see themselves reflected. They needed to be invited back and forth. So from that project going forward, I made the constant effort to make sure that we would actually pick up our bag of goodies and go on a road trip, take them up to the mothership library to give them a hands-on show and tell to try to get them going. If we wanted to probe more in depth on potential political failings, if you could repeat the question, then I'll give you precisely an answer in politics. Maybe that might be unwise, but
Compare and contrast examples of times you've been effective and ineffective in political situations.
one time in a very political situation that I thought I was being quite effective, but was not, was a couple of years ago, actually, when there was an entire, and this ties back with another event where you're standing up for underrepresented folks, but it was the March for Science that was convened across the country. And I had folks from around the community reach out to me, and they asked me to be one of the folks that helped lead that and gave a keynote at the speech. It was quite exciting and exhilarating, and it had the real feel like we were transforming something, but it really didn't make any difference whatsoever. It made the 4,000 people that were gathered in the Believe Plaza in Reno feel empowered, and it probably made the 5 or 6 people that were standing on the sidelines feel more alienated, I don't think that that necessarily helped us or moved us forward. Since then, I've become more part of the problem by actively working within state government to just try to inform the situation and make sure that the people that are making decisions have access to information with which to make those decisions. If that speaks more directly to the question. Thank you.
Do you have any questions for us or anything you'd like to add that didn't come out in the interview?
Well, actually, I need to be sensitive because you're right. You've got folks lined up. I guess the one thing that I would add is two things that I would touch on. One of them is that I want to underline. One of the core questions and concerns that I would have is looking at, first off, this isn't a resume, this is a vita. This guy's an academic. What experience does he have with public libraries? What's his skin in the game? Because frankly, one of the worst things we could possibly do is hire an academic into a real-world position. And I'd be right there with you, I'd agree. I just want to underline that the Delamere Library is an example of something that we hacked. That is a public library, or it was when it was under my leadership. I haven't had the heart to go back right now because they've got a new director and, that causes problems if you're waiting in. So I'm just trusting that all the right things are happening. But I've explained to you the passion that brought me into librarianship and drags me out of bed every morning to do this stuff. And it is that giving back. And the public libraries are at the front lines. For the last, even along with Delamere, I'm actively working with the public libraries around Washoe County, and this one in the past. I've worked with public libraries around the world, carrying this mission forward. So I have a depth of experience that most public library directors wouldn't have yet. I know what public librarianship looks like in entirely different countries, entirely different cultures. The State Department sent me to Belarus, where I worked with their public libraries there. The Evergreen Foundation sent me to literally China, where I worked with the largest public library in the world in accomplishing some of the magic that you've already done in Carson City, right? I was a guest of honor when they launched and opened their makerspace in a library that is well over 1 million square feet and nearly 10 million volumes. They have between 250,000 and 500,000 children's books. I mean, it's on a scale that we wouldn't recognize here, but at its roots, the magic is the same. And I've brought that back here, and ever since, and then actively threw my hat in the ring so the governor could throw me under the bus on the state council on libraries and literacy, specifically as the member representing the public, because I believe in the work that you're doing. And I'm here doing everything in my power to ensure that that carries forward. And if I can just underline it again, the Carson City Library is a critical piece of the infrastructure of libraries in this state. Without the active participation of this position, tag teaming with the state librarian on the legislature and local government, the right things aren't going to happen. And that's where I'm honored to offer my service. A couple of other pieces that we haven't touched on, other than I suppose I should probably mention that I'm a frustrated recipient of the National Medal from the IMLS, because De La Mare was this close to earning that, when literally at the last moment we had you heard that we had a staff member at the university who was serving on the IMLS council. She was just coming off, but it was a conflict of interest, and so we had to pull the application. That's a mistake that won't happen here should you want to carry that forward, because I think you deserve it. And part of how we are already carrying that forward is the very active role, the work that you're doing in support of entrepreneurship. My background in that area, again, I've driven that bus. I mean, I have the T-shirt on what it takes to start a company from scratch, multiple companies from scratch, and what's meaningful and how that works with the library. What you're doing with the Adams Hub across the way has such potential. And I'm also, out of all the people that you might choose to throw under the bus, I'm deeply and intimately entangled with the existing entrepreneurship and innovation that's ongoing in this state. For the last 5 years, I've been one of the core members of the Sontag entrepreneurship competition that happens at the university in Reno. I've hosted and sponsored multiple Startup Weekends events and Ignite Renos and so on and so forth. Sorry, I'm going on at some length, but I think that touches on it. I wanted to speak, though, to any sense of concern that you might have about the public librarianship, and or why is this guy even here interviewing? Is he just kicking the tires when he's got the title of state librarian already? The universe is pretty clear when it comes to some of these things, and it seems to me that the universe is saying, hey, if I can be so indelicate, I was talking with, well, sorry, I won't share any indiscretions there, but suffice it to say, I would have second-guessed anyone that chose to turn down your offer because of all the things I just mentioned. Carson City is also, not just with the state library, but it's the leader. Carson City founded the Nevada Libraries Cooperative back in the early 1980s, well before we even had a thing called the internet. The Library Cooperative was happening, and it's still seen as that leader. The Library Cooperative is rolling forward, as you've seen when you look at the literature. It is absolutely bringing on new members and doing bold new things, and it will not be able to do that without the staunch support of Carson City. And so I'm eager to be here. They can find someone to fill my shoes if they need to. But this position is the critical one.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much from everybody on the board for taking the time to interview. So,
The pleasure is mine. Again, I'm just down the street. And if I can reiterate one last time, a huge honor to be pulling on this rope with you and with the members of your team, who, again, I just can't say enough good about what they accomplished by showing up to the legislature repeatedly. Well done, team. Thank you.
thank you very much. With that, we'll take a 5-minute recess to gather our notes, and then at that point, we'll bring in the next candidate. We have everybody back, and we have our second candidate ready, so I will go ahead and reconvene the meeting. So, Ms. Bush?
Yes.
What we're going to do, we have 10 questions for you. We're going to start on my left, your right. We're going to work our way across the bench, and then we'll do it a second time.
Okay.
And if you could, for the record, just state your name.
Lavinia Bush.
Mic on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello. Could you tell us about your experience as it relates to this position and why you're interested in the Carson City Library Director position?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me here today. Right now, I'm currently the Access Services Librarian at California Institute of the Arts. But to understand why I'm here today, I'm just going to summarize really briefly how I ended up at Cal Arts. My first career was as a classically trained ballet dancer, and I started as a performer and then moved into arts administration. In that capacity, I ran a large nonprofit ballet company in Central Florida. We did the largest production of the Nutcracker with the Florida Symphony. So 2 boards of directors, friends of both groups, lots of project management. Did the same as I moved out west, even had a company for at-risk youth at the time. And we performed in the Olympics, the Winter Olympics, 2002, and the Reebok Human Rights Awards. So I had an arts background. But around that time, I decided to go back to school. My kids were older. Studied geography. That's my bachelor's. Thought I was going to work for FEMA. I'm kind of a science geek. And since when I was in the performing arts, I didn't really get a chance to be as academic in that way. So as I was studying that, to that end, I realized at that point that what I really like is just learning. I'm a lifelong learner. I've always been an avid reader. So I came across librarianship, and it was like coming home. And at that point, I knew that's what I was supposed to be doing this whole time. So as I was working in that field, I've done many different jobs because I came from being self-employed. I've worked from, cleaning the floors to managing the staff to doing the budgeting. So I probably have a very varied background compared to a lot of people that have been just in librarianship because I've been self-employed for so long. And I found that out when I got into the library world, that some people have very specific vision in one area, but I tend to look kind of at the whole picture organically. And thankfully, when I went to California Institute of the Arts, the dean at the time noticed this really unique skill set and asked me to be the Access Services Librarian. And it's been a wonderful opportunity because at Cal Arts, we only have 5 librarians. It's a very small library. Disney built the school, and it's the school that Pixar comes out of. So we have a very competitive program in all the different métiers. And at any given time in the last 8 years, I have been in charge of that library. Of course, Access Services is a very front-facing position, as you know. We're public servants, and we are the main service point on campus, I would say. And in doing that position, I realized that I could absolutely run a library. I'm sure of it. I do it on a daily basis at work. I like the autonomy of doing that. I like inspiring my staff. I supervise about 80 people at Cal Arts. And I like to find out what makes everyone else be inspired. I have had bosses that didn't so much do that, and everybody is in the library field for different reasons. Some people aspire to just stay where they are, and they're really good at it. And other people want to move up and try different things, and that's okay. So I like to try to figure that out. Carson City, the reason why I'm here, I have a soft spot for Carson City. I've been here many times. My partner, he spent many summers as a child at UNR. His father is a New York State Supreme Court judge, or was retired, and so he taught law there in the summer. And so when we got together, we traveled here, year after year, and he showed me his love for this area. And also, I love the West. I'm a published author. I write books about nature and how they inspire my writing, my poetry, specifically this area. So last year I had a sabbatical, or creative leave is what we call it at CalArts. And I spent it in an RV for 4 months, traveling the West. Spent quite a bit of time in Nevada, actually, and going to places that really spoke to me. And this area was one of them. So that is why I'm here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Bush, what is your vision of a public library's purpose and role in society?
I think I agree very much with the mission that's already in place, although it's very broad, to inspire learning, to facilitate connection, and to create community. And I really like that part of your mission, to create community. My vision of a public library is a welcoming space, almost like your living room. You should be able to come in and feel comfortable, sit in a nice chair, feel creative energy around you, be inspired by the discovery of new things. And some public libraries succeed in that. When I worked for the Los Angeles Public Library, there was a few branches that did it really well. And of course, there was also branches that did not. You came in and it felt very cold, not welcoming at all. People didn't look up and smile at you. You didn't have a one-on-one relationship with your librarian. And I think that's very important, and it's paramount to my vision for public libraries. We are serving the community in which we reside, and it should be a safe space for everybody to come and explore. Even people like myself that have had major career transitions, the only place that you can do that is with information and knowledge. I didn't know that librarianship existed until I got there. And I have students every day that I deal with that don't know about certain things. And I like to think of myself almost as a guide, a mentor to them. They might be studying music theory, but they didn't realize that film video has all these fascinating things to them, and I can show them to that area. And just by doing that simple thing, I have redirected where their life is going. And it's exciting because some of them return later on, they have families, they have kids, and they say, it's so important what you did, the time that you spent with me, just giving me an ear, to listen to what I have to say. And even from my own experience, when I was growing up, I grew up in Minneapolis, so spent a lot of time in the libraries there, is really where my joy of learning was fostered.
Thank you.
So, can you tell me how you go about getting results and build team spirit, but not burn people out at the same time?
Yes. Just as in public libraries, higher education has all those same challenges. Me, particularly with my staff, I meet biweekly with everybody that I supervise, check in with them. I like to have a shared understanding of what our goals are and our expectations, but I also like to hear what their vision is, their goal. I like to hear their ideas and listen. Obviously, as a director, you have the final say, but if you're not working as a team, then things will not work. Something's going to break. And an example for two of my supervisors right now, circulation. One of them is, I call him my ride or die circulation supervisor. He's just there. He loves it. He's been there 15 years, and he's going to retire from that position. And he takes great pride in doing that job well, and he knows that collection better than anybody. And that is wonderful for me, and I appreciate the life energy that he's giving to our library. But then I have another supervisor that aspires to be still a filmmaker, and he's at CalArts because he likes the library, he likes the environment, and I know that about him. So it's my responsibility as his supervisor to help him with that goal. So continuing education is extremely important, opportunities for growth and career. Everyone has a different idea of what they'd like to accomplish. But if you don't talk to your staff, then you don't know that. And I'm also kind of a person, and I've had to work on it myself because I'm kind of a go-getter. I think kind of 5 steps ahead. I'm one of those people that has 20 browser tabs open at all times. They give the bigger picture. But I have to empower the people that I'm supervising to do their task and do it well. And so even if I know how to do something, sometimes it's good to just give moral support to that person, allow them to move through the steps to learn something new, just like people have given me the opportunity to do. And then talk together about, okay, how did that go? How can we change that? Could we make it better? And finally, a library is only as strong as you are working together. So it just takes one person in a library to really bring the morale down. And speaking frankly, the library I'm at now, we have incredibly bright librarians, but we have, some that are, I would say, kind of 1 foot out the door. And whenever you have someone with 1 foot out the door, they're not really 100% present. And so it makes it challenging to really sit together at meetings and ask these questions that you're asking me today. What is your vision? What can we do outside of the box? We're given this much from the budget. How can we make that stretch? And they're just kind of sitting back and writing. And, that makes it difficult for others to raise their hand and say, hey, I've got a great idea. And lastly, it's taken me a long time to learn how to find my voice. As a dancer, we didn't have to talk. So that's probably why I loved it. But I am kind of a quieter person, and sitting on all the committees I have at the college has been extremely useful for me to learn how to speak my mind. But I do realize that other people have all different personalities. You have introverts, you have extroverts. I don't know if you've read the book Quiet, but if you're in the library, you know it. And if you don't leave space open in meetings and with dialogue with other people to take a moment, digest what you've just asked them, and then to speak, if you're always talking over them or telling them what you think they should say, then you never hear from half of your staff. And sometimes it's the staff that is a little bit more reserved, is the word I'll use, that have some really great ideas. And then they raise their hand and everybody sits back and says, whoa, did they just say that? Of course they did. And I'm an example of that being successful because at CalArts, with my business background, they put me as chair of the faculty salary committee, which is the bargaining, negotiating committee with administration, a really difficult, time-consuming committee. And in that capacity, I had to really learn how to speak up, and I was able to pass a salary advancement plan for the first time in 20 years at CalArts, which required me to author it, get faculty buy-in. If you're familiar with higher education, it's really difficult to get everyone on the same page. We have shared governance similar to parliamentary procedure that you use at the board. And we were able to do it and get it implemented this year, which was a huge win. And it was really empowering for me to be able to have that experience. And I think people were really surprised and saying, oh, Lavinia did that, the librarian. So it was good for the librarian too, or the library, at CalArts.
Thanks. I know how difficult bargaining is. I used to work for a law firm and we did employment bargaining, so I know it's a really tough job. So tell us a time where you developed a viable strategy, but you hit roadblocks roadblocks and you had to adjust your strategy?
Well, there's been many times, I think. Well, one of it might have been the integration of our library, the migration, sorry. We went from Voyager to WMS a number of years back. Being an access services, you know that you're in charge of the ILS. And we had a lot of challenges with OCLC at the time, which is the vendor we use for that product. And there was a number of times that I went to conferences and had, I don't want to call them confrontations, but they didn't really like me after a while because, I had to walk up to their developers and say, hey, your software's not working for us. And, they have the roadmaps, the vendors, in 6 months and 9 months and 12 months. And usually they fall short of that roadmap. And I like to call our system at the time was like a 2-year-old, kind of had temper tantrums when we were using it. Now it's like a 7-year-old, it's a little better. But in order to use it, it was really frustrating because in order to deliver services to your patrons, you have to have a working ILS. And you have kind of an expectation that when you purchase a product that it's going to work. And OCLC's product, they're a large company. There's many libraries that use their product. So we had to really change the way that we interacted with our ILS. Something creative that we did is we needed to have a new format type that wasn't in the systems for interlibrary loan, and we made it a teddy bear. It had to be something that we didn't have in anything else. And I thought that was really clever. So people get their interlibrary loan and we check them out as a temporary item and it looks like a little bear. But we don't have toys in the library, so it didn't conflict with any other cataloging that we had. But moving forward, I've been to many OCLC gatherings. They actually met at Pepperdine University and I was asked to go there and speak with other librarians that had the same challenges. And again, it became almost like a negotiation with the developers, the software engineers, to help them understand why the things that we were suggesting were so important to our service model. Sometimes when you have someone that is behind the scenes, and my partner, he's in IT, so I understand the way they think. They have to be very technical, and there's a reason for that. But we always have this service element that is just paramount to everything. The patrons don't care what's going on behind the scenes. They don't want anything to inhibit their access. They just want to open the catalog and get what they get. So if I was telling them all the things I'm telling you now, their head would be spinning and I would have lost them in the first 30 seconds. So they don't want to hear that. So I had to somehow explain that to the vendor. And actually, we had, after having a few conversations with them, together with the dean of the library at the time, we were able to get them to change some of the ways that they were using the software. We got them to implement a better inventory system. Before that was set up, I had to do inventory by hand for 200,000 print items, one at a time, scanning with the laptop and the stacks. We had to get it done. So I also counted that as a collaboration. I would look at it as a collaboration between the vendor and myself, and one that ended up successfully. But at first, it was definitely an issue in our library. Hi.
My question for you is, could you please lead us through your decision-making process on a difficult problem you worked on?
Yes. If you don't mind, I'm going to use an HR issue for this because it's something I worked on this year. As you may know, in libraries, in universities, there's been an uptick in mental health challenges. For public libraries, mental health, and maybe homeless patrons. For higher education, we have young students that are away from home for the first time, and we've had a lot of mania, mental breaks happening at CalArts. This has been one of my greatest challenges in my job, and something that stretched me as just a human being, to learn how to handle this. And the reason why is because I hire so many students every year, and when a student is there and they're present, and for instance, in this one situation that I'd like to share with you, they were taking their medication. a master's student, so a more mature student, showing up on time, very engaged with the library, really excited about the research, that then began to kind of slide and have mental episodes, breakdowns. And we saw it happening, and you have to be very delicate with these matters. So we didn't pull in HR at that time. What I normally do in that situation is first I talk to the supervisors underneath me, the ones that are directly supervising the student, and we have a meeting, and we check in quite regularly in those cases, usually daily, if it's a student like that. And so if it was a patron at the public library, we'd probably do the same. And then if it becomes something that we really need to start documenting, then I start to document it with memos. So I have a written record of what's going on. Also, in higher education, you can't do email documents because of FERPA. So we just really have to handwrite a lot of things in these situations because they are so sensitive. And I have had many times, I am the point person when there is an issue, as I've just mentioned, in the library, where I bring them into my office and we have a sit-down discussion. That's one of my primary functions. So I brought the student in and thought it through a lot, and I tried to ask him exactly what was going on, but respecting his privacy or his health issues. And oftentimes people will share, if you take them away from the front desk, which I kind of think of as a performance space, the service desk. So when people are out in public, sometimes they're very more animated or angry or excited or whatever the case is. So if I take them into my office and we sit down, it's just them and myself, then we can have a person-to-person conversation about what is going on. So I did that, and I thought I had checked all the boxes. And it turned out that student ended up withdrawing and going to get some care through student affairs, and they helped this student get into the help that he needed for short term. But in doing so, I got called into HR and to the provost's office because, of course, everyone has an interpretation of how that might have gone. And so the student, because they were in a state of mania, was really upset by not being able to work, because what I forgot to mention is that I had to slowly take him off the schedule. Not abruptly, but slowly. And so my process in a situation like that is not to act in the moment, I think is the most important for me. I like to sit on things just for a moment and try to think what's best for both people. This student wasn't going to graduate in the state that he was in. And we were in jeopardy in the library. My supervisors felt a little bit of betrayal for the way that the administration was speaking to them about the situation, because also one of our primary jobs is to protect the space. I'm in charge of the facilities as well in my position. So the health and safety of everyone, and that just doesn't include the students or the patrons, that's my staff as well. And I wanted to be able to empower the staff to make good decisions in those situations. So what I did is first, I walked through the steps that was required of administration and HR to discuss with them openly and what had happened, and being completely transparent, because transparency is important to me, and shared with them what I thought was the best thing to do with a student moving forward. And then after that, I scheduled a meeting with the powers that be, and in this case, it was student affairs, to have a meeting with the staff, not about what's best for the student in that case, but what's best for the staff. What tools do they need at that moment so that they can feel safer in their work environment and that they won't cross any lines? Because what happens is when people get challenged in that way, they stop doing their job. They stop being that person that sets the boundaries because they're afraid of the repercussions. And so, as you can see, that was a really delicate situation, and it's something that I've had to do the last 2 years in a row in my job. And it required me to walk through each thing and really troubleshoot and decide, what is the end that I'm trying to achieve here? In this case, the end that I was trying to achieve was to make sure the well-being of the patron or the student was good. And this student actually still comes back and visits me. He's thankful. He's on his medication again, he's doing well. But also I need to make sure that my staff feel comfortable with what happened and that they can continue to move forward and mentor other people and provide service to other people and not feel as if they've done something wrong. So, there's a lot of moving pieces in that example, but I think it really shows as a leader how you really have to walk through something and be cognizant of everyone that's involved and try to get to the best point of consensus. Yep.
Could you describe your informing strategy with customers, bosses, peers, and direct reports?
I'm sorry, my what strategy?
Your informing strategy, how do you keep those individuals informed?
Yes. As I mentioned, I have biweekly meetings with all of my staff, not just to tell them what projects we're working on, but also to hear from them. But if there's something that's going on that I need to let them know, I am a very available person. I have an open door policy. My staff can email me at any time. If it's something that it's project oriented and I need everyone to be on the same page, I like to have them in on the discussion right from the beginning. So we can talk about, say for instance, we did a large weeding project in the library this summer, and I really needed to hear from the circulation staff how they felt about it, about the timeline that I was suggesting, if it was feasible given their other workload, what kind of help that they would need, if there's anything that I was missing or overlooking, as far as, because sometimes when you're not in the stacks every day, which I like to be, but when you're doing other things, sometimes you can't be. Sometimes you miss something that someone that is hands-on in the stacks every day is seeing. Like, oh, this area of, and this, the Ks are terrible, so we need to know. Or, oh, there's books disappearing from this area. Those are things that you don't know unless you actually talk with one another. So I am a firm believer of communicating, maybe over-communicating, I would argue, from the very beginning. And that's the way you can probably, hopefully, stop a lot of the miscommunications that happen further down the line. If we're all talking to one another, when problems come up, which they will, there's very few cases where something runs extremely smooth. There's always something in the library business. I mean, I like to say we really are giant inventories of information. So something is always slightly off or slightly challenging or not as we suspected it to be. If they don't feel comfortable coming to me and telling me right away, just as I need to be able to tell them something right away, then we've failed from the beginning. If they're afraid to come into my office and say, hey, there's something wrong here in this area, or with the goals that we set forth to do this project, it's just not going to work that way. Then how can we be creative together to figure out a solution like we did with the inventory at CalArts? I mean, that was creative, but it took many minds to do that. No one person can have the answers for everything. And if you have a strong staff, it's really important for them to feel that they can talk to you and share and be a part of the process, because then you have the best results. Does that answer your question? Okay. Thank you.
Have you ever had to be a champion for people not like you?
Oh, all the time.
Could you tell us about one of those experiences?
Yes. Well, I can use two real brief ones. One would be the one circulation supervisor I call him my ride or die. He's older and he's very soft-spoken, very gentle-hearted, kind of an artist at heart, and that's probably why he's at CalArts. And sometimes he doesn't speak up completely. Sometimes he mumbles on his job, but he's really good at his job. He really cares. And so, yes, I've had to champion for him in many times. In fact, when I first took over this position, we did start to go through the motions of having to meet with him more regularly. And I had to write, a memo to him, unfortunately, saying, we do evaluations there, and just setting some more strict expectations. But as I got to know him, I got to understand him as a person and realize, okay, this is part of his personality. How can I work with who he is? He really does want to do a good job. He cares. And in fact, he probably cares too much. And that's where some of his energy gets drained at the end of the day. He's just trying to get everything for everyone that they need, and it kind of exhausts him. So, yes, I started to champion for him and tried to use positive reinforcement, because I think before there was a lot of negative reinforcement simply because of his personality type. And this goes back to him, what I was talking about earlier about there's different people. There's introverts, there's extroverts, and there's everything in between. He is definitely more of a quiet, introverted person, but he's very, as I said, very good at customer service. He really does. It does matter to him that people get what they need, and he will go above and beyond looking for a score that's been missing for 5 years. He's just almost got like magic fingers. He can find it. So as I started to speak up for him in meetings and invite him more to the table. So if we have, right now we're searching for a new dean of the library, he's a part of the search committee, because his voice matters. It matters greatly who is running that library. Not just the librarian's voice, but his, because he is on the front lines every day. He's been there so long, and he absolutely knows the service level that's expected. And I think he was very thankful that I included him in that process. And I also championed him with HR. So when I first met him and he was having difficulty with having a new supervisor and the change, which is often the case with people that have softer personalities, they're very sensitive. And so as we got to know each other and I worked with HR, they also know that we've walked a road, we've gone down a journey, a path together, and to a positive end. So he has done really well. He's performing really well in his job. I believe that he likes his job. He likes coming every day, and we have a great relationship. And I consider that a personal win, given that the people before kind of put him aside. Oh, that's just him being him. And I believe that because of it, the library is getting the best from both of us. And the other thing that I would say as far as championing people would be for the patrons. It's a sensitive, again, there's a lot of sensitive issues in the library world, but we have students that are going through changes, gender changes in college. And I've had many student employees that have worked for me that have started with one identity and ended with another. And we have all had pronoun training at CalArts, and this is something new for me, so I was learning with that. But in some cases, you have to champion for that student they're living their own life and how they're showing up, and what gender they choose to identify with should not affect how you view them as an employee. And so I've had to champion in many cases. People have come back the next semester looking completely different, dressing different, and making sure that there's no bias behind the desk or with their colleagues. And each time that's happened in the last number of years, I believe I've gotten better at it, and that's something I'm proud of too.
So could you tell us about a time when you felt pulled in opposite directions on a values or an ethics issue?
Well, I would have to say it has to do with my work with Academic Council, which again is the faculty governing body at CalArts. When I worked on the faculty salary advancement plan, usually I'm a pretty easy person to get along with, I would say. I like to listen before I speak. I don't really speak over people. And I like to hear different opinions. And you're not going to hear me getting too fired up unless it's something that has to do with that really hits my core values and ethics. And in this case, it did, because the administration or the powers that be were effectively attacking what people did as far as what their value was to the Institute. How much should they be paid? What they considered to be a reasonable salary for their jobs. And also in the language, it was clear that administration was making far and above what the faculty were in many cases, and really pushing their concerns aside. So in my position on academic council, which I've sat on for 3 years, I had to push back against people that I didn't really want to. And that includes the college president who came to our meetings. We're a small campus, so they're sitting at the table. He's from NYU, and I have had one-on-one conversations with him many times. The provost, the CFO, who is new, she's from Deloitte, which is a big consulting company, very powerful company. And so there's a more corporate feel right now in our institution. So in order to push back against that, I had to find ways to communicate why this issue was so important to me without letting emotion lead, because that is never going to be effective, if you lead with emotion and you're, over the top. So I had to take a breath because it was very upsetting to a lot of people. We got very close to a strike, the faculty, which is really something that's unheard of at CalArts. So I was able to calm the waters, thankfully, with the plan and get everybody on board. But it took me really speaking up to some of the leaders without worrying too much about my the repercussions for that. So that was one situation where I did that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so can you give us an example and compare and contrast times that you've been ineffective and effective in political situations?
Yeah, okay, we were just talking a bit about that, I think. Okay, I've already talked about Faculty Salary Committee. I think I'm going to go back and talk about my arts administration work, which I dealt with many people in elected officials, actually, in that position. One of them would be the board of directors for the ballet company, Ballet Orlando, which actually Bajonas directed after I left that company, Fernando Bajonas. So it's a really respected ballet company, and performing with the Florida Symphony. And we had a board of directors at the time, and they had a daughter, one of them, and they wanted the daughter to perform the lead. Okay, and this is a story that you've probably seen acted out in many different variations with different elected officials, and sometimes their personal needs, unfortunately, overcoming the needs of the organization. So yes, I had to push back against a very powerful person in the community, and again, help him understand why that was inappropriate to put us in that position. It was not effective in that case for me personally, because that person was powerful, and it was very difficult to work with him after that. It was effective for the company as a whole because it was better for the ballet company. So in that situation, I had to do the right thing, and it was actually negative for me, but the company still stands, and the ethics of the company still stands. And people have gone through that company and gone from performing in Orlando to being with American Ballet Theater, Boston Ballet. It's still there, and it's still serving its mission. And that's what matters. If you personalize things too much, I think that's the problem. But I think in any leadership position, you can't be afraid of any kind of negative feedback you might get for doing the right thing, because the right thing is always the right thing.
All right, last question's the easiest question. Do you have any questions for us or anything you'd like to add that didn't come out in the interview?
I do, actually. What could you tell me as the biggest challenges for the Carson City Library, looking forward a year, 5 years, and 10 years down the line? I was reading your strategic plan, and obviously I've seen your library, I walked through today. And I know that there was some questions in the plan about the actual physical space, the idea of sustainability as a model right now, moving forward, because grant funding can be just specific to one thing, and it's really difficult to project plans forward. So I'm wondering, in your eyes, what you see as the challenges 1, 5, and 10 years.
So, I'll try to field this as best I can, but I'm probably going to defer to Diane for a fair bit of it. In the short term and ultimately in the long term, we are, in my opinion, we're outgrowing our library. We have patrons there all the time. We are doing absolutely everything that we can, to maximize use of space and everything like that. We actually just completed a very large renovation of the first floor of our library, and got the polished concrete floors that I'm sure you saw and everything like that. But yeah, reorganized everything, moved a lot of office space, moved a lot of meeting space and things like that. My hope would be like when we're in the 5 to 10 year span is that, we're potentially, looking at another larger building or an addition or something like that. But, that's kind of my hopes for it. I'll defer to Diane for anything that she thinks.
Well, this is just expanding on what Jeremy shared. We do use and are still looking to use the spaces best and as creatively as we can. And in that, in responding to what the community needs, what our patrons need and express a need for. And so we are bumping completely against the edges, our walls. And in that, we have started taking our services outside the walls because that's what we need to do. We do have mobile operations to be able to go to different locations. We take a lot of stuff on the road. We have a partnership with the Boys and Girls Club, so we have space there and have some part-time staff there. Again, just because we're have been bumping against the walls, and I like to say that we use just about every inch that we can. There might be some storage place under some stairs maybe we haven't mined yet that we might need to use. But that is, in the long range, that I think is what the people of the community and what, so they can optimize and have the best service available to them. That is what we're looking at, is in the 5 letters space.
I thought as much. And I saw that, 70% of Carson City's population has a library card, but you service a lot of people from other communities that use the library here.
And we are, for a public library, we're probably very liberal in our eligibility. Part of that depends on, or is based on, state government is here. We have a lot, of operations here where people come into town. So we do offer library cards to people who live, work, go to school in Carson City. So we do have individuals that come in, work, are very important parts of the community, but may not actually put their head on a pillow here.
Got it. Another question I have is reading the Adams Hub contract. It seems like there used to be something in the library that there was business entrepreneur support in the library. I'm not quite sure what what was. And, I've used the SBA myself, Small Business Association, when I ran businesses, wrote business plans and all those kind of things. What is the forward thought with Adams Hub? I know that it's a contract that is through the life cycle of the strategic plan that has just been written, so 2024, I think. Is that kind of a trial basis to see how it goes and to see if you can transfer some of those needs, the public needs, to that arena?
I'm going to let Diane expand on it, but I do want to say, yes, we've been part of the Adams Hub before we even had this contract with them. We have provided the Research Ninja services. We've helped provide entrepreneurship. There's a couple pieces just in Carson City that the hub has been mimicked, I guess. It used to be a different entity than it is now. And so there's been some restructuring of that. And then we've been involved in that. Going forward, I'm going to let Diane talk about how that looks.
Sure, and I think what you're referring to, some of the history in Carson City Library, there's always been a very focused goal to definitely support business and business development in the city. And that started with grant projects back. There was something that used to be called the BRIC, which was the Business Resource Information Center. It was a partnership program with some city offices, an off-site location, and linking in, trying to match up with exactly what was needed by the business community. And as things went through the recession, that, kind of pulled apart a little bit. We brought some of the services back to the Carson City Library, but we still had that focus to definitely support that part of our community, and that has been played out in some of the grants that we've had, working with Manufacturing Technician 1 program, WNC, and then where we're at with the Adams Hub, the contract. About a year ago, it is kind of an experiment. So that part, it's not set in stone, and it is an experiment to see what kind of interactions will be important for economic development, business development, entrepreneurship, incubating businesses. And the library, however that experiment goes, the library is still very committed with the business community and to be able to support, bring services. And that's, we look at a lot of the different things that we have, not just print material, but electronic material. As Trustee Long had mentioned, having an embedded research individual at the hub itself. So I don't know if that gives you a better perspective.
Yeah, the closest Small Business Association is in Reno. Is that correct?
Their full office is there. We have an office set aside in the hub for them to be down on an occasional basis. We're still working out because they got new staff. So that's a piece, trying to make sure the resources are here for the developing business community.
Okay, I think it's wonderful. I also have a question about is it the Nevada Cooperative? I'm a part of SCELC, the Southern California Electric Library Consortium, long acronym. I'm on their product review committee, and that's Northern and Southern California libraries, and basically we're reviewing, evaluating, and trying to make informed decisions to collectively negotiate for cheaper prices for the library with all the vendors, the publishers. I'm sure some of you might have heard about Elsevier and the UCs. What's going on with the lawsuit there. And if not, it's a pretty national news story, but, the big publishers are the big publishers. And I'm wondering how you interact, if you could tell me. I've read about it, but it's also always helpful to know the Carson City Library as a part of that co-op. Are you getting reduced prices in your databases?
So again, we'll defer to
Sorry.
Diane and
No, that's just fine.
possibly a little bit from Amy.
Yeah, the Nevada Library Cooperative has existed since the 80s, and it has taken on different programs and done different things based as technology and programs have developed. But the focus of it and its foundation is the integrated library system. So across the libraries that participate, and it's a true cooperative at this time, so every library, no matter what the size, has the same voting on the governing board. The integrated library system has really been the bedrock and foundation. In the last several years, they have added additional cooperative pricing models, cafeteria approach to some sources or some resources, mostly electronic, so it hasn't been that much in the print buying environment. But there have been discussions of really taking a look at a more effective way to use that number of libraries and the potential buying power, and even in that buying power, look at even a larger model that doesn't just include the cooperative, but potentially looking at cooperative buying on a larger scale.
Does it include universities? Did I read that, or is it just public libraries?
Go ahead.
Western Nevada?
There's one college, it's Sierra Nevada College
Okay.
up the lake, actually. Western Nevada is not in it at this time. And then I guess the other kind of more research, there's a couple of is there at least one historical society
And museum.
and a
yeah.
museum. But most of them are public libraries.
And the fees are the same for the Reed versus the research libraries?
I assume it doesn't have
The
anything to do with the type
fees
of institution.
for, the basic membership fees, yeah, there's a basic membership fee, but then depending on your participation in the ILS, how large you are, how much how much of the resource you consume, the pricing model is based on,
What is?
yes.
Okay.
So there's a
based on
pricing
size.
model that's based on number of patrons, number of items, that kind of thing.
There's much discussion in the consortium I'm a part of Reed versus research libraries, and research libraries are doing a lot of publishing. And they have a greater benefit to some of those negotiations, and the Reed libraries are paying the same amount, which would be, a Reed library would be considered a public library, I assume, in that equation. And so I guess that's what I was trying to ask, if there's some equality in the way that you participate in the co-op. And it sounds like there's some sort of measure of what your library does. I did have, may I ask you guys a question? Am I allowed to ask the staff a question? Is that okay? I just wanted to hear what is your favorite part about working at the Carson City Library, if you could share it.
All right, Irma Reinhardt, Access Services Manager for the record. So I think the number one thing I enjoy most about my job is I'm learning so much more here than I could at any big conglomerate library district. And like you, like a lot of people here, I'm also a lifelong learner. I think that's the number one thing that attracts me to staying in libraries, is being able to constantly and consistently learn. So just a cornucopia of opportunity that I get to enrich my own knowledge and enhance whatever skill I want to pursue. I think that's the best part of working here.
Thank you, and I appreciate what you do, being in Access Services. It's a tough job.
Maria Costa, for the record, I'm the Creative Learning Manager. One of my favorite things about working here is just the variety. Every day is different. We have so many great opportunities, different services that we're offering. It's just been really fantastic, especially with some of the technology that we've been adding in, and just working with the events here in town and different organizations. So those are my favorite things.
Thank you.
I turned it off. Amy Lauder, Collection Development Manager, for the record. Forgot my mic was still on. I guess my favorite thing is working with people who are enthusiastic about things. It doesn't really matter to me what, but that's the energy that is probably makes any kind of a workplace better. And I also you're talking about the co-op a little bit, in a position to work with libraries all over the state, and by that, and then sometimes all over the country, but we're kind of in a fun spot for libraries. We talked about a little bit, it's the state capital. This is kind of we're the biggest library in the co-op. And we also have our neighboring libraries that aren't in the co-op in Douglas and Washoe that we also communicate with a pretty good deal. So it's nice to have that network that actually expands quite a bit.
Thank you. It seems to me, and maybe you can confirm this, that because it's a smaller staff, in some ways you all are not siloed. You can, is that correct? That you can learn from each other and assist each other when needed. Is that the case, would you say?
Diane Baker for the record. I'd say that is what we work towards. It is very easy when we all have great things to do and sometimes a lot on a plate. It's really easy to get really focused. It's like, ooh.
Someone's excited.
Yeah, woo. Really focused. So we do try, and I think we succeed pretty well on that. I don't want to say we are in, perfect mesh on those things, but yes, we do. And a lot of the programs that we do bring in important parts of the other sections. So, you get a great program. Maria's getting going with creative learning. There's support from collection development. Or if we're looking for different ways to bring things out, even to individuals walking through the door, access services, and coordination on there. But
Collaborative, you would say.
it's
definitely.
collaborative, but you have to be, like anything else, you still have to be intentional.
Yes. Thank you. And I can only think of one other question I have, if it's okay, if I have time. I know you have a Friends of the Library group, and they seem to be very engaged with the library, which is really nice to see. And I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on that relationship. They seem to do really well with their book sales.
And yeah, it is a very important group to the library. Their sole mission is to support the library. They have been pretty successful in the past with book sales and other outside fundraising events. They are right now going through some structural changes. I was both a library trustee and the president of the Friends of the Library for the last several years, and termed out recently, so now they have a new president. And we just lost our bookstore manager she's been there, I think, 4 years as the official manager. So we have a brand new manager of the bookstore. So they're kind of all getting reacquainted and trying to decide what their going forward goals are going to be and how they're going to continue to support the library. But that is the number one goal that will always be there, whoever's at the head of the group. We have about 300 memberships now, and that includes, mostly couples, so there's actually more members than 300. And we recently hired a publicity group, so we're getting more professional-looking publicity out. We revamped and started a new website, so we want everybody to know that we exist.
PR is so important.
Yeah,
Because if
right.
you don't let people know what you're doing, they
Right.
don't know till they know.
We have a very successful bookstore, by the way.
I have read that. Thank you for sharing that with me. I think maybe I will.
You might go home with something.
Okay. Oh. I think that's it for me as far as questions go.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for, I'm sorry? I believe we do. Just a quick point of clarification.
So we just wanted to know. I think from hearing you talk, I know the answer, but I just want to confirm. You're still at the library at the California Institute of Arts,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yes.
It just said through July 2019, so I was like, let's clarify.
That's probably when I filled out the application for
That's what we
this.
were thinking.
Yeah. And it's listed twice because I started there as a temporary for someone on creative leave, and then I got hired full-time. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for taking the time to interview and,
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a joy thus far, and we'll see you tonight, I guess.
yep. Thanks.
Thank you for your answers.
All right, with that, we will take another 5-minute recess to collect our notes and get everything together before we bring in the next candidate. slightly longer break than we had intended, but I think we've got everybody all taken care of. So I'll go ahead and reconvene the meeting at this point, and we have our third candidate, Ms. Zachariah. Is that correct?
That's right.
So what we're going to do, we have a series of 10 questions for you. We're going to start on my right, your left with Ms. Balderson. We're going to go across the board and then do it a second time.
Okay.
So if first we could get you to state your name for the record.
My name is Gail Zachariah.
All right. And we'll get going.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our first question is, please tell us your experience as it relates to this position and why you are interested in Carson City's library director position.
My experience, the library I currently work at is very similar in many ways to the Carson City Library. It's smaller, but it's in the community, it's smaller, but a little bit smaller, but we have many of the same things. It looks to me like, anyway, on like the makerspace, it looks like we have the same tools. And that makerspace was something that was my initiation. I mean, I've proposed that, got the money for it, developed it, the policies with the board. So I think I would have a lot to offer with that. It looks like my philosophy of service and goals for library service and the way I approach things, it's very similar to what you had before, but I'm not sure that's, may not be what you want this time. I'm hopeful it is. Why am I'm looking to be a director of Carson City? In my job now, I am a head of a division in the library. And, I work with 3 librarians under me as a team. We do all the programming in the library for adults and kids. We do all the outreach. We do all the grants. We do the PR. So I'm out in the community a lot. And I also do all the youth collection development. But I'm ready. I've been there for a while, and I'm ready for something else, something new. And Carson City, it's new, but it's similar because I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I spent a lot of time in northern Nevada. I was in 4-H. I came to northern Nevada a lot. When I was in college, I studied Basque Americans, and I went to every Basque festival in Nevada and restaurant in Nevada and California. My brother still lives in Las Vegas. I have a few friends in Nevada still. So I'm familiar with Nevada, and I think I would fit well here. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So, what is your vision of a public library's purpose and role in society?
Well, to me, the vision of the role of a public library in society is to be a community library. So it's the role of the library in a community that I don't know what a community is. It could be a neighborhood, it could be a state, but a library needs to respond to what a community is interested in and needs to be really involved in the community stakeholders and the patrons, the whole community needs to have a part in the library. There are some constants with library service that, so when I say that, I don't mean say that you live in a community that, just is interested in art, so only buy art books. You want access, which means that you're going to try to fill needs that are demonstrated, but even kind of predict what your community might be wanting and needing, so that you're working a little bit in the future and you're working with immediate needs. I know people look at libraries having changed a lot, and they have changed a lot. I've noticed from when I used to work in Las Vegas as well, the Las Vegas Clark County Library District. Libraries back then, I used to always think, oh, they changed so much from when I was little, because people would come to the library and they would stay for long periods of time. Even back then, they weren't coming in just to get books and leave. They were coming in to engage with something. But, over my years in working in libraries, I kind of think libraries have always been that way, because I know that in a couple of towns where I've studied or I've read about libraries in the past, I've read about libraries being really, like in the 1918 flu epidemic, some libraries all of a sudden decided they reached out to their community and they offered health programs. And that's a lot like, now you read about, and you hear I just heard on the radio this week about, because it's the anniversary, the 5-year anniversary of the Ferguson riots. And so like the Ferguson Library, when there was a crisis in their town, the library responded, and that happens a lot with libraries and floods, or, where I live, there's a lot of times power outages and there's no electricity, and people have to come to the library for services. So I think libraries have always responded to their community needs, and that's my vision for libraries.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So how do you go about getting results, building team spirit, and not burning people out at the same time?
Well, I think the best way to do that is to, involve your team, from the beginning. So they're, doing things that they have feel value. There's a want to do it. They'd see that it's valuable, important. So instead of dictating what should be done, I would want a library team that is going to help develop ideas, and those things will then, it doesn't mean that people aren't going to get burnt out, because sometimes, I work really hard. I know that I'm currently at my job, I just said all the things I do, that's probably like 3 jobs. And that people might see that and they might think, I think everyone should do that, and I really respect other people, time, but there might be somebody else that's really dedicated, that really wants to do a whole lot more than they're capable of. Really, I know I have a worker right now that we have an IMLS grant, and it's a really big one, and we have I have a coordinator working with that, and I think that's really too much for her. So what I'm doing is trying to find, and she agrees too, I think she really wants to do a little bit less. What she really would like to do is work from home. That's not something we can do. But what I can do is maybe cut her hours a little bit and help bring somebody else up, because she feels that, because of personal things, that she probably can't really work the next 2 years for the grant anyway. So we can maybe have 2 people working at that one job. So I feel like I'm responsive. I try to gauge the situation and talk to people and be responsive to what their needs are and the library's needs. Welcome.
Hi, could you describe to us a time when you developed a viable strategy, but then you encountered a roadblock, and how did you adjust your plan accordingly?
Well, a lot of times I might have ideas about how things will work. We just did a renovation at the library as well. And, so you have ideas how things might work and how things might go back. And it doesn't work that way. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the best thing to say is I just had one. Even getting here was a tremendous roadblock. You don't even know. I mean, I know that I went to an ILMLS maker forum before I came here, so I was in Madison. And then I did have to go home, but then at the airport, because I thought it was easier, I was going to go home for like 12 hours. But then that car, the battery died. So I was really late getting back home, so I only had a couple hours to change suitcases. And then I got stuck in Chicago. And then I got here, which I thought was going to be really great, but the hotel doesn't allow check-ins till 3 o'clock. So I had to change my clothes in a dirty hotel room. And then the bathroom at the gas station as well a little bit. So I think that, I don't feel like those are roadblocks, though. Because when you say that, I think I don't really see things as roadblocks. They're just little stumbling things that it's just interferences. That's how I kind of just move around and, find another way. Yeah.
Could you lead us through your decision-making process and on a difficult problem that you've worked on?
The thing that comes to my mind now with the decision-making on a difficult problem, in this renovation, we ended up with a dedicated teen space. Before, like when I first started working at the library, we started having a teen area, and we got it really big, but there was no place for any chairs, or any place for people to sit down. And we also recently, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we hired a dedicated teen librarian. But now that we had a space, we had to come up with a policy. And that was a difficult thing to get everyone, because, again, not just the board, going to go to the policy committee of the board, but I also want our staff to be comfortable with it. I want the teen librarian to have an input. And, we already had a policy for the youth department, and I didn't want it to be too much different. At least I didn't want it to be philosophically different, so that because we were really the same department, 2 different spaces. So we had to work, for a while, we had to spend months just really talking about it, kind of had an idea, and then we'd think about it, but I wasn't ever finished until the teen librarian was satisfied, and then we went to the board, and they just made some grammar changes. So it's accepted now. You're welcome.
Could you please describe your informing strategy with customers, bosses, peers, and direct reports?
Well, I write press releases, and for the customers, I write press releases. I maintain at least that part of the website. I'm responsible for the social media, posters that go up around the community. I do a lot of informing the public in person. I represent the library at a lot of community places and meetings. Staff, we have, we do email. We share an office. We work pretty closely together. We talk one another, and we follow up with an email to kind of, when we have talked about something, we think that, it's going to go somewhere, we follow up with an email so that we have a record of it. The emails are good because of that, because, we have archiving email service, and I mean, it's good for us to have it. It's that way. We also have different departments in the library. We get together, not as often as we used to before the construction started, and the construction doubled our space. So now we have twice as much space with the same amount of staff, and so we have a little less time. And we used to have department head meetings, and then we used to have division head meetings too, where we would communicate things with staff, all those people.
Have you ever had to be a champion for others who are not like you?
I'm not sure. I think that in some ways we're all alike. In many, many ways we're all different too. I don't think there's too many other people really like me. I think my background's pretty unique, and I'm sure all you guys are too. We deal with all kinds of patrons at our library, and I don't know whether it's champion. I'm a champion as being responsible for the youth department. I'm always an advocate and a champion for kids and all families, all families in the community. So I would say, as far as using, that seems like a strong word to me, but yeah, I'm a champion for all the families, and I think our library in Keene and any library, it's a place where people and the whole community come together, and it's usually probably the only place left, or it's probably always was the only place, because it's a free place, and people can go and spend time there without having to spend money, and but then it also brings in other people as well. So it's really going to be a cross section of your community more than other places, because it's it's a small community. You probably only have one library. I mean, you do, but most small communities only have one library. So it's not like you could go to a neighborhood library that might have different socioeconomic group. Thanks.
So can you tell us about a time when you felt pulled in opposite or different directions on a values or an ethics issue?
I don't know. One of the things that there's a couple of different areas that I'd see in all libraries that, librarians probably are pulled on ethics and values in terms of, say, privacy and access. Those two kind of combat against one another. But, personally, the one that I would be most invested in probably is about access to the internet for kids, because at our library, we don't filter. And it's really important, that's really important to our board that we don't do that. And at times, that would be my value too, but that comes up against the access value, because kids have to have a parent sign their card to be able to use the internet. And especially anymore, when kids aren't really on the internet so much, it's like playing Minecraft, where it's using the internet, but it's not what most people think of it as the internet anymore. And so they are, in a sense, denied. So I often have felt that, it could provide more access to people that need it if we did allow a filter. But our board, I'm really appreciate that they have such strong feelings about that, because it is a core library value, and they really stand by it.
Okay, the next question is, could you compare and contrast examples of times you've been effective and ineffective in political situations?
I've received a lot of money for the library, and I go to meetings like this and ask, well, I don't really ask so much for the money, but I have to ask for the money to be received. And so I work with the Friends, and I work with funders, and I work with groups. So in those ways, I'm a representative for the library, and I've been successful, unsuccessful. I think even I was successful, but it was difficult. There was a man who wanted to donate a lot of money, and working with him was difficult, and it was difficult for everybody. And he didn't like the ideas that we offered. We ended up getting chairs in an aquarium. He had different ideas, but we found we were okay with it. Again, I feel like it all worked out okay. And there are still people in the library that are unable to talk to him, but he did come up recently to check out his aquarium. He was a little unhappy with it, but he talked to me, and he wasn't unhappy with me, which I felt I was successful with that.
Do you have any questions for us or anything you would like to add that didn't come up during the interview?
Do you have certain things that you're looking for? Certain type, qualities that you think would be.
So in general, we're looking for a pretty broad spectrum of experience. As I'm sure you know, coming from a small library or a small community library, you end up having to wear a lot of hats. And so being able to navigate the political arena, being able to, manage the staff successfully, being able to serve the patrons' needs, you kind of have to be a jack of all trades, if you will. And that's more or less, I think, what we're looking for. I don't know if any.
Community involvement too.
Yeah.
Because we're a small community. Community involvement's really important as well.
Yeah. So how involved of a board are you?
Ooh.
That's actually an excellent question. So we have, I feel like we've kind of naturally split a couple of duties. Amanda, on my right, she kind of handles most everything with the Adams Hub. Phyllis was formerly the president of the chair of the, and president of the Friends of the Carson City Library, that does a lot of the fundraising for us. And then I think Diane and I, and Sina before her, were in contact at least a few times a week, sometimes sometimes every day, it seems. So, I think that we're a very involved board. Our members on the ends, Mr. Cranston and Ms. Balderson, they're relatively new. We haven't,
Relatively being,
yeah.
this is my first meeting.
Yeah. So we haven't thrown them into the mix just yet, but we're planning to. So,
I'm the High Chancellor of IT.
yeah.
And I'd like to put a word in there is, from our perspective, or my perspective, we have a great board to work with, and even though we have transitioned people on and off, we get great support from our Board of Supervisors who appoint, and we have a great relationship. It's not, I know from dealing with a lot of libraries over time, that's not always the case, but we do have a good interaction here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Diane. I think we try to support anything, like if things are going on and happening, and there's extra help, we always ask like what we can do to help and be involved. And, we're here to support, and that's our main goal. I think we all feel that we want to do whatever we can because this is an amazing library that we have.
So what kind of challenges do you think a new director will have?
So going back to what we're looking for, we're definitely looking for the jack of all trades. We're constantly with the legislature, we're, looking for funding and things like that.
Working with the hub and.
Yeah, working with the hub is definitely a big one that we've. Yeah, it's been an interesting experience from time to time. I'm sure Amanda has.
I think it's just extra. It's just something that, like, while we have a lot of pieces of it integrated into the library resources, the hub is kind of its own standalone, sort of standalone, I guess. It's just a little bit different. It's all about business and providing business resources for Carson City. And I think that's just a different challenge for a lot of library directors. It's not within the regular scope of what a library director, I think, really always deals with on some level. Some of it's familiar, and some of the parts of it, I think, are things that are new. That's my input from that.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I mean, fostering entrepreneurship and bringing businesses to Carson City is such a big thing that even before we became heavily involved with the Adams Hub, we were already doing. And so, having kind of the business background at the same time would be a great thing, because that's challenging, definitely.
So so I think it's like a co-working place too, right? Is that true? Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's small business and big business are the things you're trying to bring, right, too?
Mostly small. I would say
Small.
like entrepreneurship, and then smaller businesses here.
Yeah.
There's training resources. There's other resources that the library provides as well. And then there's the co-working space. And
So do you tie the makerspace into that in any way?
I can jump in there. We have had discussions about that. We had our makerspace in the library. We have done some things for different clients over the time. So we have had interaction. There's been thoughts, sometimes spaces, concern, but there have been thoughts about maybe having some maker items, environments, 3D printer there at the Adams Hub for Innovation. But at the moment, that's not a focus, but it is an option to consider. But we have had integration with businesses there, and we've actually had some nice integration with a few other businesses in the community with the makerspace that we have. So we do see it as an extension where it can be a starting place to prototype.
Because, of our makerspace, I'm on a lot of groups, Facebook groups, for a lot of the tools that makerspace has, especially vinyl cutting. There are a lot of people starting up vinyl cutting businesses in their garage. So that would be an idea, to let people practice and before they invest, because the vinyl cutters are expensive.
And we appreciate that. We do have a vinyl cutter, and that's one that we need to, that we're looking to develop more, because you're exactly right. And it's, even if it's just the one-off, if they're not doing the whole business, there are a lot of nice business-related applications
You
for
could,
vinyl
yeah,
cutting.
right, things, and that's why the people are going into that, it's in the garage, to sell to those, like you're saying, yeah. So, what about the community? It's your library, how do you think the community, I mean, I've read the long-range plan, and it seems like a lot of people were saying things like, and also the Adams Hub, the thing about the, I've read, in the library's long-range plan, a lot of people felt like maybe libraries aren't needed anymore. And then I saw that at a lot of, I know, I would be a little surprised. Although at the airport, someone told me that too. I talked to her a little bit, but but you do get it sometimes, that I haven't heard it for a while, but I did today. And also, in the Adams Hub, people were worried about libraries, it being a quiet place. I haven't been in a quiet library in years, 20 years. So I'm thinking that libraries are places of collaboration and, yeah.
And you may have, there was a recent letter to the editor and things we're responding to regarding that it's, some people still have a hard time transitioning, that it's not the perfect cone of silence location.
I mean, I know most patrons would like to have a perfect cone of silence in a library, and most libraries aren't able to give that. But, in those kind of places where you ask for community input, you're mostly from people that have concerns more than people that are happy often. So, yep.
Can I get in here? I would venture to guess that probably one of the biggest challenges for our new director is going to be exactly this, changing the concept of the community, that this is not a quiet place, nor is it a place that's just full of books. And they cannot wrap their heads around the fact that we need more space. And that's going to be the biggest challenge.
I would think you do need more space. The way I kind of think, I like to say it, because books, most people still come to a library for books. And so, what I like to say, I just started this, is that, most people don't realize books are more than most people realize. Books, especially for kids, they're teaching them how to learn. I mean, it's so vital. And that's a really good way to get community involvement. But the whole community is to reach out to kids and become a really important player in early literacy. And then people see the value that you are offering. And when those parents come in, they see the makerspace, or they see, the virtual reality headsets or something else, maybe you check out video games or board games or just something, and they think, oh, I didn't know, I haven't been in the library for a long time, and so then they come back again.
We get that. I think we get that a lot. It just seems day to day, the people that we talk to, that's part of our strategic plan, is getting the word out, that there's more to the library than just books, and that we're a resource, and it's a place to come and be, and not just check out books. But we do get that a lot here. That is one of the biggest challenges for our library. We are one of the largest libraries in this area, well, on the co-op. And, but we still have that challenge, even though we have a lot of, people who know about the library in Carson. We still have the challenge of that it's just books, or that it's not needed anymore. We don't have all these other, like technology pieces to it as well. So that is going to be a big challenge.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, I don't think I have any more. Thank
you very much for taking the time to come and interview with us. And we will see you at the meet and greet, I'm sure.
Yep.
Excellent.
Okay. Yep.
So
Thank you.
with that, The board will recess until 6 PM, upon which we will reconvene for said meet and greet.